Hello, and welcome to the Unsung Cyberhero Adventures TV network. Today's show focuses on answering the questions. What is disinformation and what purposes does it serve? What must the US and other democracies do to ensure fair and accurate elections? And how will the cybersecurity and IT community help ensure a fair and accurate election and combat disinformation? What about societal resilience? What influence does fake news have on politics? How broad is the reach of untrustworthy sites? Is the internet making things worse? For example, increasing polarization? Or is it increased polarization a reflection that things are getting worse? We'll discuss the backfire effect and echo chambers and the value of fact-checking social media partners. All of that and much more, so stay tuned to find out on today's episode. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and information technology communities. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. It's also why we're called a TV network. We're all about information sharing and business-to-business networking. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. This is especially valuable now that the community's primary way of conducting business, conferences, is put on hold for the foreseeable future. Well, today we have three great guests. Let me begin by introducing John Bambenek. He's Vice President for Security Research and Intelligence at ThreatSTOP and an incident handler with the Internet Storm Center. He's also an adjunct lecturer at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Illinois, where he teaches courses in cybersecurity. He's been researching security threats in criminal organizations for 18 years and coordinating with US and foreign law enforcement entities to help bring criminal actors to justice. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Our next guest is Dave Piscatello. Dave has been involved in internet technology for over 40 years. He has authored books on internet and remote access, including Understanding Voice over Internet Protocol Security. Dave publishes articles regularly on security, DNS, anti-phishing, malware, internet policy, and privacy. He maintains a highly active, insightful, and entertaining info site as The Security Skeptic. Dave is a partner at Interisle Consulting Group. Hey, Dave, we're so glad to have you.
Good morning. I'm really happy to be here as well.
Thank you. And last but not least, please welcome Llewellyn King, the co-creator and host of the PBS show, The White House Chronicles, a weekly news and current affairs program known for its originality, crisp thinking, humor, and panache. He created the program in 1997, and he produces and hosts it with journalist Linda Gasparello. The show focuses on what is impacting the way we live and work, especially now, including science, technology, medicine, energy, the environment, books, and contributing to policy. Hi, Llewellyn.
Hi. How are you? Good to see you, Gary.
Thank you so much. You know, Llewellyn, let's begin by looking at the big picture. I mean, you've been covering the White House for a long time. Yeah, how would you describe the current state of American politics and cybersecurity within it?
Well, I don't know about the cybersecurity within it so much as it's in disarray, and that's a very bad situation. Our problem as journalists is to find out what the truth is at a time when lies are very common, and a lie is a very, very hard thing to kill. Lies that was circulated in the 19th century, like the Protocols of Zion, is still around. You don't kill lies easily. What has happened with modern communications, technology, and cyber communications is that lies have been spread more thoroughly, more quickly, more totally, and have entered into the fabric of our thinking. We assume certain things to be facts. We assume, that William the Conqueror attacked in 1066. We weren't there, we don't know that. we take that for granted from our education, et cetera, et cetera. A lie too can live like that. In journalism, particularly in Europe at the moment, there's an awful problem with vast dishonesty coming out of Russia by cyber and also by physical enactment of dishonesty. For example, the Russians have been found to create events with skinheads, except they aren't skinheads, they're Russian agents. This has happened in the Baltic states, Lithuania, etc., where you go down as a reporter, you see an event, you see it with your own eyes, you have it on camera, you put it on the web, but it's a fake, it's a fraud, it has no basis to it, but it will circulate and become, for some people, part of their belief system. So the danger is, how do we detect a lie? How do we detect a dishonesty? And how do we scotch it? At the White House, we have a president who tends to say things that are not of impeccable veracity. And how do we scotch those? They too enter into the general conversation. And that is the great difficulty. Then we have the effect of the internet and social media, where little bits of dishonesty are magnified, amplified, circulated, recirculated, re-examined, rebroadcast, until it is very hard to know what the truth is, where it came from, and how to verify it. We are in a very dangerous and difficult situation in terms of knowing the truth and therefore acting on the truth.
Well, let's dive deeper into that, Dave. Is disinformation and what purposes, does it serve in your opinion?
So if you look at what has transpired over the past almost 10 years now, we have had an increase in objectives by nation states to undermine democracies, to cause some political rift, to polarize societies or democracies. We see this in the United States. We have very, very stark and apparent differences between an ultra-conservative and a progressive to ultra-liberal population. But it's not just political. It's not just election. It can be seeds of discord in everything from posting information that is incorrect or inflammatory about the recent events following George Floyd's murder, or about COVID. There's a significant amount of misinformation that is being presented to cause more fear. It's also exceptionally harmful when someone talks about injecting bleach, when someone talks about the availability of vaccines when there aren't any. These are all disinformation campaigns. They don't directly attack the government or democracy, but they undermine the infrastructures, undermining the healthcare credibility in the United States, for example, is a good goal for someone who can exploit COVID and the fear that that people have around that pandemic. So I think that Llewellyn made some really, really interesting comments about how broadly this reaches. It reaches from as high as our own administration, where he generously characterizes our president's many tweets as not impeccable veracity. I love that. But it also extends back to Russia in the Crimean annexation. It goes deep into ISIS, and in fact, if you look at some of what has been written or some described elsewhere in disinformation literature, you see that there is a sort of trend of make something great again. Make Islam great again. Make Russia great again. Russia would like to be like it was with the Soviet Union. Putin has actually said this. So I think I'll cede the floor to John to add. But remember that you can affect political political opinion and affect elections in a number of different directions or vectors.
That's incredibly interesting, Dave. Maybe you can share with our audience your origin story. How did you come to understand matters such as this?
Well, it's very. I would say that when I came out of college, I really was probably a late bloomer to computer science. There wasn't a lot of computer science in the early 1970s to go and study. I learned how to program. I went to a mainframe manufacturer. I spent some time programming mini computers and mainframes. Then point-to-point data communications, then networking. From networking, I ended up taking a job that required remote teleworking. This was back in the early to mid 1980s. So we had to invent virtual private networks in order to do this. And we created all sorts of hack tunnels to do it into our own organizations. What we did back then would be considered a breach today. So I had an opportunity to learn sort of hop by hop as the internet grew, how things worked, what the urgency and need for security was, and it went from securing my own communications to my organization to looking at how enterprises could secure themselves. That devolved to small and medium business, then to individuals. Then I started looking at wide area networking, while I was at Bell Communications Research and securing services for them. And through all this evolution, I had a lot of exposure to hardware and technology that people generously donated to me, and I played with them and studied them. And after a while, I realized that there was a significant nexus of criminality in the domain name and internet address world. So I spent a lot of time there. So I've pretty much been a gadfly, just going, and following where the heat maps took me.
Well, speaking of heat maps, I can't think of anyone better to comment, John. You've heard from Llewellyn and Dave now, the significance of the issues that we're dealing with. What does the United States and other democracies around the world, what do they need to do to ensure, secure and fair elections?
Well, I mean, there's the conduct of the elections itself, right? And then there's kind of the information and societal environment. And we know basically how to conduct elections relatively securely. Whether election officials want to do that or not is another story, right? There isn't a cybersecurity professional out there that will say, sure, let's do this online, or let's not have any paper trails. And we have lots of checks in our system to at least detect fraud. And I think that's one of the biggest limitations of security generally and cybersecurity specifically, is that really all we can do is detect. There's very little prevention to be had. But as Llewellyn was talking, right, he mentioned the Learn protocols. It's a book I hadn't thought about in a long time. It's decades old. Right? I forget exactly when it was first created, but it was pre-internet. The problems we're facing aren't terribly new. And a lot of VC firms talk about, oh, this technology changes everything and revolutionizes everything. The internet has really just done one specific thing, and it's pretty much worked as designed. It allows anybody to create information at radically low or effectively no cost, transmit it over large distances, and do it over immense volume. Anybody has always been able to create disinformation. We've had it for a long period of time, right? The Learn protocol, or the protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, right, is an example. But you need to have access to a printing press, and that costed money, right? You can affect elections with a direct mail campaign. Anybody who's lived in a competitive congressional district has seen those little mail cards, usually black and white, with the opposition candidate saying, you hate this guy because of this, and then the color picture of the candidate they want you to vote for, with kids or whatever, to make you feel all warm and fuzzy. They know you're only gonna look at it for 13 seconds, so they engineer the messaging to make you feel better about one candidate or make you feel worse about another in 13 seconds, right? that is a form of manipulation, and where the line between marketing stops and manipulation begins is not a bright line, you know. So but ultimately, like I said, all of this stuff goes back to questions of human nature, right? And when people look at cybersecurity generally, or security is security, right? We're looking at trying to create technological means to solve human problems, many of which that have existed since the beginnings of our recorded history. Part of my background is I have part of a degree of, I'm in progress of a master's degree in theology as well. So I obviously look at ancient religious texts, right? And those, besides theological documents, are historical, right? They informed ancient societies, right? And you take a look at just one of the commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness, right? We forget what that means because we have forensic science now. But for most of human history, the credible testimony of two people was enough to convict somebody of a crime, right? And most of those, and many of those crimes carried the death penalty, right? And you wouldn't have a commandment, right, of the top 10 worst offenses in both, in the Judeo-Christian heritage, if that wasn't a common occurrence, right? Where people were manipulating their, in effect, their justice system to either, you know, misappropriate funds or to get their adversaries killed, or any number of things. All of this stuff has existed since the beginning. What the internet has done is mean anybody can create information and anybody can transmit it over the internet, right? It's kind of this radical libertarian notion of how the internet was created. And now it's working as designed. I can start a political blog, and if I get people looking at my stuff, then I get influence. The Russians can comment on American politics too. When you let anybody talk and anybody have their say, anybody can talk and anybody can have their say, and they can use the various algorithms that, you know, go into search engine rankings or into the news Google or amplification networks on social media to get that out at radically low cost.
You know, so Llewellyn, through your body of experience, what are we supposed to do? I mean, what about societal resilience? Can society itself sustain this influx of information sources without you know, any scrutiny? You know, what are we supposed to do?
I think we've got to do what we've always done. We've got to verify. We've got to be more distrustful, certainly more skeptical. And one of the things that you learn very quickly in journalism is to be skeptical. And skeptical of anything that anyone tells you, no matter who they are or where they're positioned, and whether they may be speaking with malice or without malice. It can still be wrong. It can still have a detrimental message. So that skepticism is part of the trade. It has to become, I think, for people who want to avoid these pitfalls, part of their approach to things. We're skeptical about advertisements on the television. And that is not all. You also get, you know, we're skeptical about that sort of thing. But we've got to extend it particularly into the area of politics when we are told things that are suspect or detrimental. And we've also got to be skeptical about our own enthusiasms, because enthusiasms are generated by what we believe to be facts. If we believe that so-and-so is a wretch and so-and-so is full of virtue, we probably should have skepticism about both of those things. It gets very difficult at a time like this when the media is really very polarized, particularly the television networks. We don't have any straight down the middle television network at the moment, I don't think. Particularly the cable ones, not so much the broadcast side. I think still endeavors very hard to come down the middle. And it's a very difficult time. The president is denouncing you, saying you're the enemy of the people, that everything you do is fake, that you have an agenda. Most journalists don't have an agenda, but we do fall both prey to our sources and prey to the inbuilt prejudices of our institutions. If you ask people, they will say that the Washington Post is a liberal newspaper. I think it is. I work there. But it never said it was a liberal newspaper. It always said it was an independent newspaper. And they always pointed to prove this, to the fact that they endorsed Richard Nixon for a second term, before, even while their own reporters were working on information that would in the end bring him down. And truth is very hard to find. Sometimes you can find it. You know, if I drop this pen, I can prove this gravity, it falls. But everything else tends to be a bit subjective. And so there's no quick fix, there's no magic bullet, there's no way of saying, henceforth we will know what the truth is. A society must always be struggling to find the truth. Maybe as individuals must struggle to find the truth and to base their judgments on what they believe to be the truth. And I'm glad that John raised the subject of religions, because religions have different concepts of truth, maybe to other people. Absolutes. There are very few absolutes, but we do need to look out for massive disinformation and manipulation of news. I quoted the Russians. We see it elsewhere. We probably have a lot of Russian interference here. We know that some things that appear on the net are suspect. All reporters live in fear of being taken in by a phony document, a phony communication, something that was designed to mislead them. And you know, there's no litmus, there's no absolute litmus. You can't take a piece of a document you get and dip it in acid and see if it changes color. It doesn't work like that. So personal judgment, and hope that you got it right, and hope that you identified the phony as opposed to the real. And it's a continuing struggle. It was always a struggle in journalism. It's just much more of a struggle in the internet age. It is compounded by the shortage of talent coming into journalism, particularly in local newspapers, etc. The financial basis of those publications has collapsed, and so it's not very attractive to good minds. There's no magic here. It's a question of try and abandon and try again.
You know, just to build on that point, Llewellyn and John, as a former victim of a series of cyber crimes, at one point I was looking for kind of a North Star, you know, something to kind of guide me through this. And I can actually show you this. It's a little doll of Albert Einstein. And the reason it's incredibly relevant to what John and Llewellyn, what you're talking about now, is a reporter in the past asked Einstein, he said, Mr. Einstein, on one hand, you have science and physics and mathematics, and on the other hand, you have the possible existence of a higher authority or God. You know, how do you reconcile those two views? And he famously replied, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. And it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition of those two worldviews. And, you know, and there's going to be this continuum, you know, between those kind of bipolar ideas. You know, physics is all facts and God isn't, you know. So with that in mind, Dave, Llewellyn mentioned several times something that I'm sure you're incredibly interested in, which is this notion of being a skeptic. You have a series of things. Your email says securityskeptic.com. So why don't you fill us in on how you became skeptical, and how does our audience do that without crossing into cynicism?
So I think this is where the role of democratic governments, you know, becomes paramount. If you look at the difference between where the European Union is with regard to combating disinformation and trying to protect their political influences and election interference, and you look at where we are in the United States, well, I think we're way behind. That's in part because the European Union has had an opportunity to learn a great deal from the Baltic states that are now part of the European Union. There's a lot of history, all the way going back from Georgia, which and hybrid warfare, and the annexation of the Crimea, More recently, the issues in Ukraine. The European Union has adopted, and has embraced this notion of social resilience, where democracies have to fight, and push back and provide their citizens and residents with ways to understand how to discriminate or distinguish between fact and lies or fiction, or manufactured content. This is not an easy thing to do, but it is really no different from phishing awareness, from awareness with about ransomware campaigns that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. You have to get people to start to think, before I take this as fact, what should I look for? As an example, there have been campaigns that the Russians actually have conducted in email, where the English grammar and punctuation was absolutely atrocious. And people go, well, they were just script kiddies. They were just amateurs. It turns out that they weren't. It turns out that they actually were doing this intentionally, because the same kinds of people who would ignore all the lousy grammar and the absence of the Oxford comma were the kind of people that would engage with the misinformation. They were the most likely to believe it. I was flabbergasted, because I really didn't stop to think about that. But the other thing that we have to also do is temper some of this, it's all the internet's fault, with a realization that there's a denominator here. Brendan Nyhan has talked about a denominator. The volume of information that most people consume versus the volume of information that is misinformation on the internet is a very interesting fraction. And so if you put the misinformation content over all the information that CNN has alone, it's a small thing. Now the question is, how do you keep people away from that small thing? You're not going to do it that effectively with filters, with taking down domains. That's all after the fact. So you have to start to think about how do you prepare people to sit and look and go, let me fact check. Where should I fact check? Do I trust Snopes? Why should I trust Snopes? There's a lot of education here that has to be injected into our society. And I think social media platforms are going to have to take a big role in that. They're going to have to be a little bit less concerned about Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Act, and more concerned about their role as being responsible for, sadly, other people's journalism. That's not to say that they become censors, but I think the shift that they've had recently in several platforms is probably a good one, and I think you're going to see more of that.
And Llewellyn, what is your view of that very important statement, about people fact-checking and becoming citizen journalists, and now the platforms are, reluctantly, in my estimation, starting to take some accountability for their work, Llewellyn? I mean, what is your view of the social media platforms and their responsibility to the world?
Well, they tend to attract not reporting, but opinion. Because most citizen journalists, if there are such things really, are not in a position to acquire information. They get information that other journalists, other people have acquired, and they give a spin to it that fits with their particular point of view. If there is a simple slogan which denotes a point of view, then they're likely to build on that. And slogans are a very important part of propaganda and really of disinformation. If I can give you some examples, back in the day when nuclear power was both a promising source of electricity in the United States and very contentious, Ralph Nader was an opponent, and Ralph, whom I know quite well and have known for many years, would say things like, "This is a technological Vietnam." That's a slogan. That's very powerful. Or another one he said was, "They will burst open," talking about nuclear reactors, "like rotten melons." Huge visual appreciation. Not true, but huge. Scientists fact-checking and arguing against it were lost. It was asymmetrical. If you get a contention between a slogan and an explanation, you set up an asymmetrical argument, and the slogan is going to dominate. I saw once my friend who worked at the Atomic Energy Commission debating Ralph Nader, and Ralph said one of these things, and oh my goodness, he started to explain the technology as to why it wouldn't happen. Well, the net result was it made it seem even more probable that they would burst open like a rotten melon. Well, that was not so. You often have between scientists and other people, the illiterate versus the literate, perhaps, this asymmetry in argument. You say to a scientist, is it safe? And the scientist might say, well, safety is a relative concept. You've lost the argument. It's gone. But the scientist is right. And this applies to a lot of things. Say the citizen journalist, an alert public that brings things to attention by whatever device they can. The other weakness of the current system of relying on the internet, and I do it all the time, I live on the internet, I can't say, but I love it, is disinformation that is embedded in things like WikiLeaks, where a genuine misunderstanding has been built into one of the reports. They're anonymous, remember. I read things that are not quite accurate, not worth creating a great fuss about. It's situations when I was a boy in Africa, for example, or the political situation in Great Britain at one time, that I know something about. There are subtle incorrectnesses, not really worth raising a fuss about, not worth flagging, but they move into the general perception. The error is installed into the public debate, and it is almost impossible to remove it once it has been installed in the debate.
Well, I mean, we are hearing as a vivid example of that, the expression, fake news nonstop. We're hearing enemy of the people, John, does that fit into Llewellyn's kind of slogans, that he's referring to, in your opinion?
Well, ultimately, like slogans are good marketing. Why does every advertising campaign for a commercial product have a slogan, right? You want something to stick in people's heads. Most people have, I don't want to say short attention spans, but they're going about their lives. They're not experts, right? All of us here, we're well-read, we're highly educated, right? We have critical thinking skills, and we talk about this. The normal person, when I, talk about politics too, and the subtle ways of influence, their eyes start glazing over, right? Because it's just not their area of interest. There's 168 hours of a week. Some of that has to be sleeping, right? Some of it's working, some of it's your family. There's only a little bit left, for most people, right? So, that's how advertising, good, successful advertising, I guess, works, is with slogans. It plays off human biases and emotions, right? When you say "Make America Great Again," you're speaking to, people who don't feel the current system benefits them, right? And you take a look where Trump won in 2016, in the Rust Belt, where, the globalization and our world economy has arguably left them behind, and it spoke to them. I said, this is, I'm being left behind, and this man is speaking for me, so I want to vote for him. Replacing NAFTA with something else, right? Most people would never read, a trade treaty or a trade agreement. Probably many people, listening to this podcast or a TV network have never read a trade agreement from start to end, and most would never think about it, because that's hard, right? How to curate something that's immensely complex into a 5-second soundbite that you can get into a tweet. It's even a shorter soundbite into a tweet, but into into reporting, right? One of the reasons politicians, when you ask them questions, They repeat the same talking points as if they're trying to get their slogan covered without covering the nuance, because, and, you know, as Llewellyn mentioned, it's the nuance and the details, you know, where you start to lose the debate. When somebody says, make America great again, hey, I feel better. I want a better future. And who doesn't, right? You know, it doesn't speak to the people who are doing particularly well right now. But, you know, that was the same corpus of messaging that President Obama ran on in 2018 or 2008, right? Hope and change. I don't like where things are at. I want things to be better. He spoke very little of, right, the nuance of how Obamacare ultimately worked. You know, said, you know, you're not doing well. I will make your lives better, right? And that always wins discussions. So what we're really talking about is I don't want to say deficiencies or flaws of human nature, but innate aspects of human nature and just the human existence. And there's only so much time that people want to spend talking about public policy and politics. And it's actually getting much, much smaller. And the less time we spend on something, the more easy it's to influence, because then you're influenced by your biases and your emotions. And everybody has them, right? And very few people are going to sit there and do the complex analytical things of, okay, is this playing into my bias? Is this playing into my emotion? You know, they're just going to, you know, it was a thing that the CEO, Jack Dorsey, tweeted out last week. Stop sharing tweets based off, or stop sharing articles based off the headline. Actually read the article before you share it. Well, ain't nobody got time for that. Not, you know, not normal people, right? I'd read an article, but even then, I read a lot of articles and I skim very quickly. And some of the selection is based off headlines. And that's, like I said, you know, headline authoring, right? Not just in news, but in a variety of contents is its own thing. That, I mean, that's what people want. Give me the 3-second soundbite. And
well, I mean, just to build on that, then I'll put this out for, you know, any of you. What is the headline that our country needs to ensure fair and accurate elections?
I would just calm down and catch your breath. Right? Right now, we're exceptionally. I mean, we were angry last year. People are in a foul mood after over 3 months of COVID-19 and being at home. Some people lost their jobs, some people not working, all the social disruptions, all the things that we didn't even know, many people didn't even know we don't have, right? You know, kids are not supposed to go to a playground. What do I do with my kids, right? How do I deal with existence of educating at home? People are in a bad mood. And people, foreign and domestic, are playing into that anger for their objectives, right? If we're talking about Russia, you know, there's 3 things that our national intelligence agencies identify that they wanted, right? You know, in 2016, help Trump, hurt Clinton, but the big one, their strategic interest, and it's been this way since probably earlier than the start of the Cold War, diminished confidence in our public institutions, of which democracy and voting is one of them. And if you look at the messages they use, in the 60s, during the civil rights protests, they were agitating as much as they could, as you know, with the technology at the time, of racial animus and divisions in our society. And what are they doing today? What have they been doing the last 3 weeks? The same thing. They've been doing the same thing for 60 years, 80 years, you know, pretty much since World War II was over and they built the Berlin Wall. It's been the same playbook. And it's not necessarily creating division, right? It's exploiting. I mean, they're dumping fuel on fires we've started, right?
I mean, so Llewellyn, you have a unique perspective because of your longevity, you know, and proximity to the White House and politics.
Well, first, I have to salute John, because he's so right. Disrupting democracy has been a Russian goal, really actually going back into the 1930s, I think. And I just wanted to mention in passing something else, which is where technology comes in. Politicians increasingly are disinclined to have frank discussions like this one. The reason is technology enables television companies to retrieve what they said whenever they said it, maybe 15 years ago. And there's nothing more disturbing to a politician than to have put on the screen, this is what you said. I see, oh my God, I did. I've had a small experience of that. I was once testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and one of the senators said, you wrote in, I did, you don't remember. But this has really quieted down. I've stopped inviting politicians on my television program because there isn't a lot of point in doing it, because they won't get very far, and I understand why. So that we've got really talking points clashing with talking points. The other thing is that people's attitudes, they will glean from information, disinformation or real information, whatever fits a pre-established prejudice on their own. And that is either hereditary sometimes, as most people vote as their parents did, not all of them, but an awful lot of them do, but also as religion is hereditary for that matter. You don't go out there and decide when you're a child whether you're going to be a Muslim or a Christian or follow Confucius. It's a hereditary assumption of values, and there is a hereditary assumption of political values. Where information and disinformation comes in, that we pick from what is available things that fit with our values. And it's just done so quickly, so swiftly now. And a very big lie tends to hatch everyone. And once a very big lie has been promulgated and circulated, it is very hard to scotch it. Look at how long the Bertha denunciation of Barack Obama has been born in Kenya, which was a preposterous idea to begin with. How, in those days, would somebody in Kenya know that their child was going to be so important they should put an advertisement announcing the birth in a paper in Hawaii? Now, come on, that alone should have been the end of that stupid argument. But no, it had a long life. And I'm sure there are still people who believe that Barack Obama was not a legitimate president because he was born in Kenya. But once a lie comes up now, it goes around the world at the speed of light. And
well, I mean, just to
new dimension that we didn't have heretofore. But it isn't really worse or better than it was in that sense. It's just it gets out quicker. Where the damage comes in is really concerted, thought out manipulation and disinformation, as in the Russian case, as in the case of the people who work with political campaigns or looking for negative publicity or some little incident that they can build a mountain out of when it is really hardly a molehill.
Well, we're seeing some of this now in the information we're getting from the White House pertaining to COVID. And the big difference between what you described before in terms of Russian disinformation or other sources of information is this one can actually kill you. Dave, what is your view, about the information coming out of the administration pertaining to COVID, and as to build on what Llewellyn just said, if you say it often enough, it just becomes true.
So my wife is a retired nurse practitioner, and she's dumbfounded almost every time the president speaks on COVID. And one of the things I would say about that is we're very fortunate to have Dr. Fauci, who has pretty much been able to dull the effect each time the president has made a completely baseless comment with fact, and he probably has as much of a following at this point as the president. I think his is following rising, and the president has a following diminishing. I'd like to point out that what we're seeing with the internet is not a fake news problem, which is what and obviously our president uses fake news as a retort to everything. but a civil media literacy problem. It's not that much different from what we had when the printing press was first invented, and the Bible was one of the first books published, if not the first. No one knew what was in the Bible. It was presented in Latin. No one, only a handful of people understood it. The more people that actually had a Bible were able to read it, were able to look at it, and they were saying, "Well, wait a minute, it doesn't say anything here about burning witches." And so Richard Stengel, who was the Undersecretary of State in the Obama administration from 2013 to 16, makes the point in a real interesting podcast that I'll send you the URL so you can share it. He says we don't have a fake news problem. We have a literacy problem, and people need to be informed. And this is where I think the cybersecurity world has a role. What should we trust, and how should we trust it? How should we understand and choose? How does someone distinguish content that is bot generated from content that is legitimate? How do we fact check? Who are the fact checkers that are trustworthy? I think the cybersecurity professionals are in a very, very good position to help people, with some of that, and I think some of them will. It's going to be a combination of awareness and technology. One of the things that Stengel talks about is that he says schools need to teach media literacy, and media platforms should pay for it. It's a brilliant idea because the government's not going to pay for it. The media platforms have an enormous incentive to instill confidence in their service. And so, if I were one of the social media platforms, I'd say, you know what, we're going to donate $1 billion towards making people a little bit smarter, when they're reading things that somebody randomly posts, on my site or in a tweet. I think that as much as I am skeptical about how we're situated today, I'm not anywhere near as skeptical as I was before all the more recent incidents exposed how little people understood, for example, about racial discrimination. It's like I'm dumbfounded because I grew up in the 60s. I watched all this. Llewellyn, you probably remember it as well as I do. This is deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra said. And all of a sudden, astonishingly, there's a NORC report that says there's an enormous shift, not just a small, incremental shift in people's opinions about race and how discrimination affects education and affects other societal separations between blacks and whites. There's a big jump, not just a small jump, big jump in almost all the measurements, and it's across the board. It's Republicans and Democrats. So maybe I'll take off my skeptical hat for the moment, and I'll say, maybe society gets pushed so far and things become so unbelievable that even the people who are most inclined to believe the 10-word soundbite are going to start to ask questions. And if that's the case, then that's where I see our role as cybersecurity professionals. Help people do that. Help people understand how to make these distinctions.
Well, we could just go on forever. The three of you are just incredible thought leaders. And I was just wondering, would any of you like to ask one another a question? We have a unique chance to have, three great folks here.
I would like to ask Dave about media literacy education. Isn't that basically history? Isn't the history of everything also the history of media, the role of propaganda, the role of what people said about people, the way that Lincoln was denounced, for example, is part of the Lincoln story. Throughout history, there have been powerful media. Isn't that so, David?
Absolutely, and I think that there are the understanding or appreciation for how long propaganda has been around is probably decidedly low in the United States compared to Europe, as an example. I mean, I just I'm so sad about the state of our education and how limited people have been exposed to contemporary European history, ancient European history, and so if you don't study this, you don't understand. This has been around for generations and generations. Much as you can say discrimination has been around for generations and generations, and explain why. Going all the way back and looking at what the 13th Amendment actually says. Nobody knows what that. People say, "Oh, it abolished slavery." What? Really? It did it? Did you read it? Have you ever seen it? Let's go look at it. And so I think that we need to fix that. We need to stop throwing money into B-1 bombers and starting to throw more money into education. Honestly, that's and this is a good time to do it because we're in a situation now where education is really hard to deliver. And if we are going to be in a sustained society where social distancing has to become part of society, we better damn well learn how to do it, remotely and with more confidence than we can do so today.
I think that one of the things that is happening with the general availability of the internet on your telephone anyway, is that we pick our history, we pick our information. I thought it was a very telling moment at the White House. I wasn't there, but I don't go there anymore very often. But I wasn't there, but when a reporter asking a question, I think he was from Reuters, I'm not sure, with a face mask on, and Trump turned on him and said, "You're just being," and he wouldn't take it off. And Trump said, "You're just being politically correct." Well, anybody who didn't want to wear a face mask would say, well, that's just about political correctness. That's a political statement. It is not a scientific necessity. And we are now seeing a new wave of the pandemic, and we're seeing it's the stupid wave. It's not the second wave. It's the stupid wave because people wouldn't take the precautions because they were encouraged not to take the things by the President of the United States, who in history, I hope, will have to answer for that. There are many, many deaths that the encouragement of people not to take the precautions, and the politicization of this pandemic is one of the truly terrible things of our time.
I'll just to finish with something that Dave and Llewellyn said, right? Is the state of our education, right? Is how do we test people in K-12 schools? We give them multiple choice tests, right? The answers, in life in these questions, right? The role of racism and racial segregation and race relations now cannot be answered with a multiple choice test. You do not create understanding in a multiple choice test. You memorize data. Give me the 3-second soundbite. And we start with this in whenever the first standardized test is imposed in elementary schools. It's get the soundbite right. Tell me about the Dred Scott's decision, right? You're looking for A, B, C, or D, right? But there's lots of subjectivity in there. And the entire education system up to, probably the master's level is memorization and regurgitation. And all of this stuff, there's nuance and this understanding, and different people can come to different answers based on their own life experiences that are both valid. Going to Llewellyn's point about there are very few absolute truths in this life, right? We all have bits and pieces of it based on our experience, and they're not necessarily all wrong, but we beat everybody down into a multiple choice test. And throughout their entire life, it's A, B, C, or D, or 3-second soundbite, or 4 or 5 word slogan, or acronyms, or whatever, trying to diminish information to a kernel, and all we do is diminish it into a motto.
Well,
John.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
John, I'm absolutely shaking my my head vigorously and pounding my fist over what you said. one of the things that I think you can appreciate because of the style of our community, where our collaboration is often long emails with lots of analysis, lots of discussion. I actually think that email could be another emergent platform where instead of actually trying to have somebody take a multiple choice test where the uncertainty of of origin, where all you have is a number of canned choices. How about asking students to just simply write something, 150 words, 150 words. Everybody becomes more literate because they have to write. Everybody becomes more literate because they have to think now. Everybody becomes more literate because they have to go and research. And you don't have to make everything a 2,000-word essay any longer. You can tell somebody, I don't want 10 words, I want 100. I want you to explain what the 10 words are. And so I actually think that I hope we're going to see a little bit more of that, as opposed to the just lecture, go home, take what was in the lecture notes, memorize it, take the test, go off to college. Right? Because by the time you get to college, you haven't learned how to write. Especially in our industry, how many people do you know how to write? Or getting up in front of an audience. These are things that are so paramount in our society in the next 10 years, forever.
I teach in a college. I've stopped giving writing assignments, right? It's just too painful. I have no idea what you're writing, and I'm not an English professor, but get technical. I mean, if you talk about hiring skills, what do employers want? The ability to write and the ability to speak. And we do a crap job of teaching it, right? For a wide variety of reasons that are it's actually, before we said cybersecurity, we said information security, right? We don't teach people very well how to convey information,
I totally agree, John. I don't know how we fix it, but I agree with David and John. We're all at the same line on this one. And that is that we have to get people writing, because if they write, they think. And if they write, they have to make choices and thoughts and words. It's a judgmental business, writing. You need information in order to be able to do it, even in the simplest way. I think if I were to fix the school system, which I can't and won't, but if I could, I would say, teach them the excitement of knowing. That's the joy of knowing. And the companionship of literature. All of those wonderful things where you realize the human journey is not taken alone, that it's part of a vast continuum of the human experience. I think one of the things that happens nowadays, particularly because we're so technological in what we do and how we pass our time, is we tend to think that the human experience, historical experience, began with the invention of the internet. We really have lost any sense of the historical scope of things, and I think this must be something John's aware of because of his interest in global religion, which is history, the history of peoples, it's also the history of the religions. This totality. I see, for example, in journalism, my generation, young journalists, were interested in the history of journalism, publishing. They want to know about Hearst and Pulitzer and all these people. Nowadays, that's not so. They really don't want to start before Watergate and how the effects of journalism, rather than the organic truth of it, its economics, its rationales, and also its prejudices and limitations, and oddly, the conservatism of it, in that we do things the way we always did them in journalism. I'm very glad of the internet in one way. It taught us that we were doing it wrong. We were doing this very oracular kind of thing. You look at the front page of a newspaper, and in fact, people wanted something more subjective, more conversational, possibly less accurate, but that's what they wanted. And that was where the conservatism held us back, and it's good and bad. But if you can't teach people to think, then you won't get anywhere, and writing is so important. There is this division, this foolish division in science, where scientists think that they cannot write, and writers think they cannot do any math, cannot comprehend the scientific concept. It's really, really foolish. I couldn't think of it as the division between the numerate and the literate, as I mentioned earlier. And it's terribly wrong. Over the years, many, many engineers have said to me, well, you know, I can't write, and you could just fix this up and given me something which is terribly well written. Now, you know, stylistically, you might need to tweak here or there. But this is something we started in the educational system of dividing kids up. In Britain, it was called the 11 plus, when you divided them up between the literate and the numerate, those who had tendencies towards numbers and tendencies towards literature. And you didn't let them get together again until maybe, you know, middle age, when some dispute arose, and the literates have become lawyers and the numerates have become engineers, and they met in a court proceeding or a regulatory proceeding. It's a very sad thing to think that we should divide people up so early, because one of the sadnesses is that people take these assessments of themselves, assessments that the system makes of them, and then by circumstance, they take the same assessment of themselves. They assess themselves in the same way and cut themselves off from an awful lot.
Well, I think I had to revise how I started my comments, right? The internet hasn't really revolutionized much. Technology has taken the humanity out of education. And really, the standardized assessment it's a technological tool, you know, it's a machine. You enter all this data in, it spits out, you go be a doctor, you go do English, you go pump gas, right? The truth is much more nuanced, right? And ironically, right, you know, I defend my thesis in a few months, you know, I'm sitting there in front of a panel of 4 professors and defending the assumptions and biases of all my research. I'm 43, right? You know, it's probably the first time that I've ever done that systematically in education. Why don't we do that in high school, right? The oral exam is something that we've lost because it doesn't scale, right? You know, you can deal with the scaling problem. Only so many people get PhDs. A lot of people, you want to get high school degrees. I can write a small computer program that can grade 1 million tests in 5 seconds. I save lots of money. The conservatives are happy, you know, create all this data for social programs. The Democrats are happy, but it takes the human out of it, right? And that is the revolutionary change that technology and the internet has done. It's taking humanity out of the human experience.
Well, I mean, to that end, Dave, just to kind of wrap up, you know, how do we humanize the internet? You know, how do we combat what we just heard?
Well, I think some virtual classroom technologies that are experimental today are probably going to be mainstream in the future. I think John's idea of you know, more oral exams and you know, an oral, I don't want to use the term exam. I think more oral interaction, you know, can be scalable. You know, what does scalable come down to but spending more money? You know, instead of just throwing money at the technology, throw money at the educators. So like, if we have plenty of room to hire more educators. You know, imagine how much better our education system would be if we took 5% of the defense budget and instead tried to target classrooms of 12 to 15, right? With you know, educators to sell, so to speak. I bet we would have a rocking education system in K-12 in 10 years. How do you get politicians to sustain it? This is the question. You have to get society to actually believe that it lives and dies on literacy, on understanding the world that they're in, being able to articulate their own opinions. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thanks so much to John, Dave, and Llewellyn for this incredible show. We could go on for, you know, hours and hours, and I would love to have you back at some point in the future. And to learn more for our audience, we'll have their contact information in the show notes. And if you would like to be a guest on our show, just send me an email at Gary@cyberheroes with an S, comics with an S, .com. So thanks again to everybody, and we hope this helps.